Hispanic leaders within the Democratic Party say the last presidential election was a wake-up call. Donald Trump won 43% of the Latino vote in 2024, up from 35% in 2020. And those gains were driven primarily by Hispanic men and younger voters who are increasingly consuming political information through social media and not traditional campaign channels. In response, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Bold PAC, has just launched a new Get Out the Vote effort. It's called Ruido, which means noise in Spanish. And it kicked off yesterday with a launch party in Houston. According to the PAC, the effort represents a fundamental shift in how Democrats organize Latino voters, specifically through social media. Joining us, the chair of the Bold PAC, Democratic Congresswoman Linda Sanchez of California. Thank you for coming on the show. Can you tell us more about the strategy behind Ruido?
Sure. So, as you said, we saw some drift of Latino voters in the last presidential election. And so we had to think about creative ways to reach out to Latino voters, particularly younger voters, where they consume their information, which is increasingly, via TikTok and Instagram, other electronic platforms. And so we decided to partner with content creators who have followings of their own, to tell them about what we stand for, not to give them talking points, but to let them create their own messages in their own authentic, culturally sensitive way to reach out to voters where they are and to increasingly encourage Latino voters to come out early and vote, to vote not just in general elections, which we always focus traditionally on GOTV, but to start voting in primaries, because we find that when Latino voters vote in primaries, they're that much more likely to vote in general elections. So we launched yesterday, as you said, in Houston, Texas, and we're very excited about the program.
So I'm curious if we can look back a little bit before looking forward again. You talk about the drift in the last election, which was primarily Latino men and younger Latinos. What was the cause of the drift? And are those who drifted still with Trump? Do you have any data on that?
Well, we have seen huge shifts back to the Democratic Party in the last few statewide elections. If you're talking about New Jersey and Virginia, election that they just had in Texas for a state Senate seat. What we are finding is that many believed in Trump's false economic promises, that he was going to make life more affordable and he was going to, create this great economy. They simply are not feeling that. And so they're very disillusioned by that economic message that didn't come to fruition. They're also very unhappy with the way that ICE has been conducting themselves, with the brutality and the violence and the, lack of accountability and transparency. So we have seen a huge swing back of those Latino voters that we saw drift in the 2024 presidential.
Congresswoman, good morning. As you say, the economy is first and foremost for all voters, including Latino voters. How is my life going? Can I take care of myself and my family? But I wanted to ask you a little bit further about what we've seen in the streets of Minneapolis, but not just Minneapolis, really across the country, where you've had people watch their neighbors dragged out of their cars. You've seen patrols outside of schools and places where many people work. What is the lasting impact of that, do you think, in terms of politics? We know what it means for these people's lives, but in terms of politics, what are these images, these visuals, and not just the ones we show on the national news, but every single day, people looking into their neighborhoods? What does that mean for voting?
Yeah, every community that has had ICE visit them has horror stories about how ICE has conducted themselves. There is no transparency. They are masked. They don't have identification. They seem to not care that there's due process that's guaranteed to every person in this country. And they're not conducting themselves the way that even local law enforcement officers have to conduct themselves. They feel like the rules just don't apply to them. And the brutality with which they have gone after not just immigrants, but citizens and legal permanent residents as well. And when you see that in your local community, it has 10 times the impact as if you just hear about it happening somewhere else in the United States. So all of the communities that have been visited by by ICE and their lack of accountability have been deeply, deeply touched, and people are very unhappy with how ICE is conducting themselves. And that's why Democrats have stood strong against funding DHS until we see those reforms put in place that create that accountability and that transparency, and that make sure that ICE agents know that they are not above the law. But it comes, it comes from the top down. And, I'm one of many Democrats that have signed on to legislation to try to impeach Kristi Noem because she's not qualified for that job. And she seemingly just doesn't care to create any kind of accountability for the, brutality of ICE agents.
So, Congresswoman, you've got a clearly built-in campaign going forward with just, as Willie just asked you in your response, you realize that trucks pulling up outside Home Depot and any one of the brown faces thrown into the ICE vehicles. That's a very positive for you. But I want to get to the autopsy of the 2024 campaign. What was the messaging that you had that went so wrong that you lost such a huge percentage of Hispanic voters to the Republicans?
Well, I always tell people the Latino community is very diverse. So there isn't just one message that resonates or flops with all Latino voters. It's very regionalized. It's very different depending on, where the, Hispanic background comes from. So I'm not really in a place where I can answer that question because each individual voter has different priorities that are top of mind when they walk into that polling booth and cast their vote.
For sure. Chair of the CHC's Bold Pack, Democratic Congresswoman Linda Sanchez of California. Thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.